What were the most dangerous American cars during the 1980s? Today, we might think of the insane horsepower of a Dodge Demon or the track-focused Shelby GT500, but it is time to take a look into the past. A lot of you guys find my videos looking back at this era nostalgic, which makes me very happy. I enjoy digging into the engineering choices and mistakes of this time period. I wasn't around to drive these when they were brand new, but learning about the disconnect between horsepower and handling has definitely fueled my passion for doing this. Most people think the 80s were just slow, choked-out V8s, but that's not the whole story. As the decade went on, power came back, but the brakes and suspension technology didn't always keep up. We had cars that could hit 140 miles per hour, but stopped like a freight train on ice. In terms of this week's video, I will be going from the quirky handling oddities to the absolute widowmakers. Because this is a list video, I can only briefly talk about each car, which sucks because some of these death traps have so much more to offer in terms of history. Also, I would like to clarify that dangerous is subjective. For some of you, wrestling a live axle in the rain is just good fun. I did extensive research to find out which cars had the worst reputations for keeping you on the road. With that said, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Number 20. 1980 Plymouth Volare Roadrunner. Few cars represent the struggle of the early 80s like the Volare. By 1980, the Roadrunner nameplate was basically a sticker package, but the danger here wasn't speed, it was quality control. These cars were built during some of Chrysler's darkest days. The front suspension used a transverse torsion bar system that allowed for a smooth ride when it worked, but these cars were notorious for rusting out at the frame rails. Imagine hitting a pothole and having your K-frame separate. It gets a bad rap, and rightfully so. The steering was famously vague, meaning you were never quite sure where the nose was pointing. It just makes the cutoff for this list because while it wasn't fast, the structural integrity issues made it a gamble every time you turned the key. Number 19. 1982 Chevrolet Camaro Z28 Iron Duke. Okay, hear me out on this one. You might be thinking, how is a four-cylinder Camaro dangerous? It's dangerous because it gave you a false sense of security. The third-gen Camaro debuted in '82 with fantastic handling capabilities, one of the best chassis of the time. However, if you bought the base Iron Duke four-cylinder, you had 90 horsepower in a car that looked like it could do 150. The danger came from merging. Trying to get this heavy F-body up to highway speeds was a panic-inducing event. You'd floor it, the engine would scream, and you'd barely accelerate. It taught a lot of young drivers that being too slow is sometimes just as dangerous as being too fast. Number 18. 1980 Ford Mustang Cobra 4.2-liter V8. Before the 5.0 returned to glory, we had the 4.2-liter V8. This car is on the list because it was a handling nightmare in wet weather. The Fox body platform is legendary, but in 1980 it was still being sorted out. The weight distribution was front-heavy, and the Michelin TRX tires, which were metric and weirdly sized, were terrible in the rain. If you hit a slick patch mid-corner, the snap oversteer was instantaneous. It's unfortunate for consumers who thought they were buying a precision sports car. Instead, they got a Mustang that liked to swap ends if you looked at the throttle wrong on a cloudy day. Number 17. 1984 Pontiac Fiero. Man, who doesn't love the idea of a mid-engine American sports car? It looked like a budget Ferrari. But we all know the story here. The 1984 models, specifically the ones with the Iron Duke, had a nasty habit of catching fire. General Motors rushed the production, and the connecting rods were prone to failure. When they broke, they'd punch a hole in the block, dumping oil onto the hot exhaust manifold. Since the engine was right behind your head, that's a terrifying situation. I might be being a little too harsh, as they fixed this in later years, but the reputation stuck. Driving a car where you constantly check the rearview mirror for flames, that qualifies as dangerous in my book. Number 16. 1983 Hertz Olds. The G-body platform was great for drag racing, but cornering was a different story. The 83 Hertz Olds brought back the cool lightning rod shifters, which were awesome, but the car retained the old-school suspension geometry. The rear drum brakes were prone to locking up if you stomped on them. Imagine a heavy luxury coupe with a solid rear axle doing a pendulum swing because the rear tires locked up in a panic stop. It was a cruiser, not a bruiser, but people drove them like sports cars. The 307 V8 wasn't a powerhouse, but the torque was enough to get you into trouble that the suspension couldn't get you out of. Number 15. 1981 Chevrolet Corvette. The very last year of the C3 generation. By this point, the Corvette looked like a caricature of itself. The problem here was the fiberglass transverse leaf spring rear suspension combined with an aging chassis design from the late 60s. The nose was incredibly long, creating a massive blind spot, and the rear visibility was awful. But the real danger was the trailing throttle oversteer. If you lifted off the gas in a corner, the rear end wanted to come around. It was manageable if you were a pro, but for the average dentist buying a Corvette in 1981, it was a recipe for spinning out into a ditch. Number 14. 1985 Mercury Capri RS. The forgotten sibling of the Mustang. The Capri RS shared the Fox body, but had that unique bubble-back hatch. This glass hatch added weight specifically high up and over the rear axle, slightly changing the center of gravity compared to the Mustang. These cars felt twitchy. In 1985, you could get the 5.0 high-output engine, but you still had 9-inch drum brakes in the rear. Fords of this era were notorious for brake fade. 1 or 2 hard stops from highway speeds, and your pedal would go to the floor. Mixing V8 power with fading brakes is never a good combination. Number 13. 1986 Dodge Shelby Charger. Carroll Shelby went to Dodge and worked his magic on the K-Car platform. The result was a lightweight, turbocharged pocket rocket. The danger here was torque steer. This was front-wheel drive, and when that turbo kicked in, the steering wheel would violently tug to one side. If you weren't holding on tight, the car would literally change lanes for you. It was lightweight, around 2,500 pounds, which meant it was fast, but it also felt tinny. In a collision, you didn't have much protection. It was a raw driving experience, which is cool, but definitely sketchy by modern standards. Number 12. 1982 Pontiac Firebird Trans Am. This was the Knight Rider car. Everyone wanted to be Michael Knight. But the 1982 Trans Am, specifically the ones with the crossfire injection V8, were tricky. The crossfire system was finicky, causing stumbling and hesitation when you needed power, and then surging when you didn't expect it. Plus, the third-gen F-bodies had T-tops that leaked and reduced structural rigidity. The chassis would flex significantly in corners. You could actually hear the interior panels groaning as you went around a turn. It made the car feel unpredictable at the limit, like the front and rear were communicating via a delay. Number 11. 1987 Chevrolet Monte Carlo SS Aero Coupe. Designed for NASCAR, sold to the public. The Aero Coupe had that massive sloped rear window to help aerodynamics on the track. On the street, it created a distortion in the rearview mirror and serious blind spots. But the real issue was the weight. This was a heavy car, and the brakes were undersized for the mass. The suspension was soft, designed for comfort, which meant tons of body roll. If you took an evasive maneuver, the car would wallow and sway like a boat in a storm. It looked fast standing still, but asking it to slalom was asking for trouble. Number 10. 1989 Ford Taurus SHO. Ford dropped a bomb in '89. The SHO, super high output, featured a Yamaha-engineered V6 that revved to 7,000 RPM and made 220 horsepower. That was Mustang GT territory in a family sedan. The engine was a masterpiece. The rest of the car, not so much. The chassis couldn't handle the power. The front tires would light up instantly, and the torque steer was even worse than the Dodge Charger. But the scariest part was the brakes. Ford essentially used the brakes from the standard Taurus. You had a car capable of 143 miles per hour, but the brakes would overheat after one hard stop. It was a wolf in sheep's clothing, but the wolf had no claws when it came to stopping. Number 9. 1984 Chevrolet Corvette C4. When the C4 debuted, it was hailed as a handling revolution. It pulled almost 1G on the skid pad, which was insane for 1984. However, the Z51 suspension package was so stiff it was practically solid. On a racetrack, it was great. On a bumpy American road, it was terrifying. If you hit a bump mid-corner, the car would skitter. The tires would lose contact with the road and the car would hop sideways. It was physically punishing to drive. Also, let's not forget the digital dash that would glitch out, leaving you with no idea how fast you were going or how hot the engine was. Number 8. 1987 Dodge Daytona Shelby Z. Another turbo Dodge, but this one was more serious. The Daytona Shelby Z had the intercooled Turbo 2 engine. It was fast, faster than a lot of V8s, but it suffered from extreme understeer. If you went into a corner too hot, the nose would just push wide, and no amount of steering input would save you. You were a passenger until the tires scrubbed off enough speed. Combine that with the laggy turbo power delivery, nothing, then bam, full boost, and it was a handful to drive smoothly. It demanded respect, or it would put you in the weeds. Number 7. 1983 Ford Thunderbird Turbo Coupe. Ford tried to bring European sophistication to the Thunderbird. The Turbo Coupe had a 2.3-liter turbo engine. The danger here was the turbo lag. In the early 80s, turbos weren't responsive. You would step on the gas to merge into traffic, wait 2 seconds, and then suddenly the power would hit all at once, usually right when you were trying to correct the steering. It caught a lot of drivers off guard. Plus, the rear axle limited slip differential was known to be unpredictable in the rain, snapping the car sideways with very little warning. Number 6. 1985 Chevrolet Camaro IROC Z. The IROC Z is an icon. It looks fast, it sounds fast, but the 1985 model with the tuned port injection had so much low-end torque that it easily overpowered the Goodyear Gatorback tires. The rear end of these cars was incredibly light. If you were turning from a stop sign and gave it a little too much gas, you were doing a donut whether you wanted to or not. The Wonder Bar steering brace helped, but the chassis flex with T-tops removed was frightening. At highway speeds, the front end would wander, requiring constant corrections to stay in your lane. Number 5. 1986 Dodge Omni GLHS. Shelby took the Econono Box Omni and turned it into the Goes Like Hell S'more. 0 to 60 in 6.5 seconds. In 1986, that embarrassed Ferraris. But guys, it was still an Omni. It had a high center of gravity, a short wheelbase, and a chassis designed for 60 horsepower, not 175. It felt tippy in corners. If you lifted off the throttle in a turn, the back end would snap around instantly. Classic lift-off oversteer. And if you crashed, it was a tin can. There were no airbags and the crumple zones were non-existent. It was a thrill ride, but one that felt like it could fall apart at any second. Number 4. 1987 Buick Grand National. The bad boy of the 80s. Black paint, turbo V6, pure attitude. The Grand National was a straight-line missile. The danger lay in its brakes and suspension. Buick used the same brakes as the naturally aspirated Regal. Stopping this 3,500-pound beast from 100 miles per hour was a prayer, not a procedure. The suspension was soft, designed for a comfortable ride, which meant the car floated at high speeds. It felt detached from the road. You'd be doing 110 and the steering would feel light as a feather. It lulled you into a false sense of comfort right before things went wrong. Number 3. 1989 Pontiac Turbo Trans Am. For the 20th anniversary, Pontiac put the Buick GNX engine into the Trans Am. It was arguably the fastest American car of the decade. It was underrated at 250 horsepower, but made closer to 300. The problem? It was too fast for its own good. The heat generated by that turbo engine in the cramped F-body engine bay was intense, often cooking brake lines and fluid. Drivers reported brake fade during spirited driving almost immediately. It was capable of speeds that the aerodynamics of the car weren't really ready for, getting light in the front end above 130 miles per hour. It's a legendary car, one of my favorites, but you had to be awake to drive it. Number 2. 1987 Ford Mustang 5.0 Fox Body. The 5.0 is the definitive muscle car of the era, cheap horsepower. But there's a reason these cars filled up junkyards. The solid rear axle combined with a torquey V8 and a very light rear end earned it a reputation as a widowmaker. In the rain, these cars were treacherous. The short wheelbase meant that once the slide started, it happened fast. If you hit a mid-corner bump, the rear axle would hop sideways. Young drivers would buy these for cheap, modify the engine for more power without touching the brakes or suspension, and wrap them around telephone poles. It's a great car, but it demanded skill that most teenagers didn't have. Number 1. 1987 Buick GNX. And here we are at number 1, the Grand National Experimental. This was the ultimate version of the Buick Turbo. McLaren Performance Technologies helped build it. It did 0 to 60 in 4.7 seconds. That is fast today. In 1987, it was alien technology. Why is it the most dangerous? Because it was a wolf in sheep's clothing on steroids. It looked like your grandpa's car, but it had a ladder bar rear suspension that planted the tires so hard it could lift the front wheels. The danger was the sheer violence of the acceleration in a chassis that was essentially 10 years old. It had no traction control, no ABS, and no stability management. It was pure, raw power. If you spooled that turbo up in a corner, you were gone. It seduced you into driving faster than you should. And unlike modern cars that save you when you mess up, the GNX would just watch you crash. It commands respect and fear in equal measure. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you made it to this point, then props to you. You really like watching my videos, and that means a lot. The 80s were a wild time for American cars. Manufacturers were figuring out how to make power again, but safety and handling was still an afterthought. I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments. Did any of you own one of these death traps? Did you survive a rainy day in a Fox body? Let me know. That's going to wrap it up. I will see you guys next week.